Dagens travle samfunn krever mye av en blind person når det gjelder å komme seg rundt på egen hånd. Det å være god til å navigere er helt avgjørende for å kunne leve selvstendig liv og delta i samfunnet på lik linje med seende. Mange blinde bruker hvit stokk, og en del har førerhund, så begge deler er veldig viktige hjelpemidler. En svært nyttig teknikk som er mindre utbredt er ekkolokalisering. Prinsippet er enkelt. Man bruker lyd til å orientere seg i omgivelsene på samme måte som flaggermus og delfiner. Dette vil si at man produserer en lyd, typisk ved at man klikker med tunger, som så reflekteres av omgivelsene. Ekkoet som kommer tilbake vil variere ut ifra egenskapene og avstanden til det lyden treffer. Og dette kan med trening tolkes. Forskning viser at lydene som kommer tilbake bearbeides i synssenteret i hjernen. I praksis betyr dette at en blind person som ekkolokaliserer får bilder av omgivelsene selv uten å kunne se. Noen blinde klarer faktisk å sykle ved hjelp av denne teknikken.
One of many reasons why I like to work with young children is it's a great time to teach them because the world is so big and so things are quite easy for them to hear relative to adults where everything is suddenly smaller. So children, blind children, they have an easy time hearing things that we adults would have a harder time hearing. Furniture, tables, chairs, all the different things that they can.
Visionaries Norway er en norsk organisasjon som ønsker å fremme selvstendighet hos blinde og sterkt svaksynte, med spesielt fokus på ekkolokalisering. Våre mål er å utdanne norske instruktører, arrangere kurs og produsere en informativ podcastserie. Visionær innenfor ekkolokalisering, amerikaneren Kish, er med i vår organisasjon, og vårt arbeid kvalitetssikres gjennom ham.
Do it if you want to. You can learn to navigate your own environment. You can learn to orient yourself to a new environment. You can learn to travel. You can learn to play sports. You can learn to go hiking. You can learn to raise a family. You can learn to run your own household. I mean, you can basically learn to run your own life or help people with theirs on your own terms as you please. And there's nothing about blindness that prevents us from doing that.
Thank you all so much for coming this evening, for joining me, and also for joining via virtual stream. It is a huge, huge honor to share this evening with you and for you to share your evening with me. I came about 8,500 kilometers to be here, and it was worth every single kilometer. Some of which I will talk about, because funny things happen to people when they travel, and even funnier things happen to blind people when they travel. So, when we decided to do this presentation, we gave it a title, No Limits, A Blind Man's Perspective. And then, after we gave it a title, we then began to fill in the content of the presentation. Don't judge, it was just what we did. And so this video, which I had not seen before arriving in Norway 2 weeks ago, is actually very, very inspiring for a lot of reasons. And if I had to retitle this presentation, I think I would title it Do It If You Want To, which is what I began saying in the little end bit there. Do it if you want to. What is no limits from a blind man's perspective or a blind person's perspective? There are some differences, perhaps, in terms of what that might mean to a blind person. But I think there are more similarities than differences. And so one of the reasons I'd like to share my perspective with you is because I think there are more similarities than differences. Because all of us, everyone faces some form of blindness in their lives. Some form of darkness, some form of unknown, or lack of awareness. Of course, we don't know what we don't know, and we're not aware of what we're not aware of. But most of us do have obliviousness, unawareness within ourselves, and most of us struggle or are challenged by unknowns in our lives. For example, most of us don't know the future. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. In fact, we don't really know what's going to happen the next minute. So I believe that fear of the unknown, fear of the dark, is man's most primal fear. And blindness does two things. One is it tends to personify people's deepest fear. People tend to embody that in blindness. And so blindness kind of gets a bad rap as far as human conditions go. It's really not that big a deal. So what I'd like to do is share that with you, and I'd like to invite you to consider ways of neutralizing your fear of the unknown, neutralizing your fear of the dark. As anyone who adapts to blindness must do, right? Because we deal a lot with unknowns. We certainly deal a lot with the dark. Well, my eyes were removed by about the time I was a year old. So it is about as dark as it could possibly be. And I have no fear of it at all. So if we kind of combine darkness and unknown, or make in our minds darkness and unknown similar, and if we eliminate that fear or neutralize that fear, then I believe that fear is at the root, is at the foundation of most things that people are afraid of. Because most fear contains an element of fear of the unknown, contains an element of fear of the dark. So I want to just talk a little bit about my journey and share it with you with the idea that it is a journey, parts of which we all share, and my perspective on that journey and on basically living with the unknown, with the dark, embracing the unknown and the dark. So many people tend to think of blindness in terms of you can't do things. What can you do if you're blind? What are, that it interferes with our ability to do things. And if we kind of reflexively think about it, we often think of it in terms of you can't do much. I mean, if you think of all the things that you use your eyes to do, and then you're blindfolded, then what can you do? And I would say that in reality, blindness doesn't really prevent you from doing things. As I said earlier, or as that gentleman in the video said earlier, it doesn't really prevent you from doing things. There are blind people who have found ways to do just about everything, that hold jobs in just about every imaginable career area. Sports, science, NASA's full of blind scientists. Microsoft and Apple and Google are full of blind programmers, coders, software engineers. We have blind sports people. I knew a guy who was totally blind who worked for a bus company. He didn't drive the bus, so you don't need to worry too much about that. But he was a dispatcher, and he had memorized every route and every bus on every route and when it went and where it went. So you have you have the capacity for blind people to find their way into just about every imaginable occupation or pastime or hobby or leisure or recreation or whatever. In fact, I'll say something else. I have worked with students who've lost their vision later in life. Two of them come to mind right now who lost their vision as teenagers. They were both 13. And one of them has worked for all the big tech companies. He now works for Google, but he did work for Apple and he did work for Microsoft. And had a hand in inventing some of their flagship products. When I first worked with one of them earlier in my career, much earlier in my career, I worked with him on a lot of things. Taught him a lot of skills, taught him to do lots of different things, using the cane, obviously the echolocation bit we worked hard on, crossing roads, how to find public assistance. That was actually the hardest thing for him, is getting assistance from people. And I think it was the last day or close to the last day of our lesson, and we were just talking about his experiences, our experiences working together, and he basically said, and he's still maybe 15 at the time, and he said, actually, the hardest part about going blind wasn't limitations or physical barriers. It wasn't the limitations bit. It wasn't all the things that we often associate with blindness, like how are you going to do stuff. He said the hardest part was how people treat me, how they treated me now that I've gone blind. For him, that was the hardest part. Now, I take his word for it because I know how I'm treated as a blind person, but I've always been a blind person, so I don't have anything directly to compare it with. But what I would say about blindness, and we can think of it in these terms, is it's not about doing things that blindness challenges. It's more about finding things, finding places, finding your way, sometimes finding people, finding a sense of security and belonging. But mostly the physical things, finding the physical things, finding out what's around you, where things are, and how to get to them. So I sometimes like to say blindness or blinding challenges finding, but not doing. So once you've established where things are and what things are, now it comes time to do things. And that isn't the hard part. So I'll elaborate a little bit on that because finding is actually very important. On the one hand, there are the physical things that we need to find, like, finding my way onto the stage. The other is the more abstract things that we need to find, which blind people tend to be much better at. Finding a sense of belonging, finding solutions to difficult problems. There's a great one for blind people, because we sort of do that all the time. Because blindness is quite a challenge. And if you're going to adapt to blindness, you must find solutions. And when you're finding things, you're basically using four elements or four actions, four ways of doing things to figure out how you're going to do what you're going to do. And these things pertain to everyone. They don't just pertain to blind people. And I'll talk about them very briefly, and then I'll elaborate on them later with a story, how I got to Oslo. There's a story. So it's about four things. I think of it in terms of four things. There's adaptations. What adaptations are necessary in the environment to help people function better? For blind people, it might be Braille in the environment. It might be the lines that you see sometimes on the floors in transit stations. It might be tactile markers before a change in terrain, like the stairs or a platform edge. there are lots of adaptations in the environment, or lots of adaptations that people might just choose to use to help make life easier for them. But everyone uses adaptations. Sighted people have marked up their environment with signage all over the place. Like, imagine what functioning in this world would be like for you, sighted people out there, if there were no signs. Just remove the signs. Well, someone had to put those up. Someone had to put those up. And you've all been in situations where the signage was rubbish, and what do? Well, you complain, of course, and you get lost until you're not lost, right? Well, welcome to my world, because there are precious few signs up for blind people. But there are other adaptations. Capacity, personal capacity, personal capabilities, personal competencies, echolocation being one of them. I'll talk about that a bit more later, but it's what we can do, the things that we can do, the skills that we have, and how we use those skills to accomplish things, and also to help others accomplish things. Then you have technology. We all use technology. Our phone, many of you use GPS to get here. So there are all kinds of technologies that a person can use, high-tech and low-tech. This cane is an example of what we might consider a low-tech piece of technology in that it has no electronics, but it is made of space-age material. So there was a lot of technology that went into creating this cane. And then, of course, social engagement and supports. What supports do we use to accomplish things? What supports do we use to help us do things, or in the case of a blind person, to help us find things? So there may be a fair bit of support or social engagement that we engage to find things. And everyone does all those things, right? Everyone uses supports, everyone uses technology, everyone uses adaptations, and everyone builds their personal capacities to function better, to accomplish things better or more easily or more gracefully. And however we use those four things, some use more adaptation, some use more personal capacity, whatever, some use more technology, they're complete techno people, and others rely heavily on support systems or social systems. We're all basically looking for three things. We're looking for security. How secure are we physically, and how secure do we feel emotionally? Are we safe? Do we feel safe? Not only that, but how do others feel around us? Do other people feel secure? Do other people feel safe around us? In the case of a blind person, often not so. Other people feel quite insecure around us. You're going to feel insecure as I walk toward the edge of the stage. Some of you know better. Right? So if I did not have a cane and I walked toward the edge of the stage, now we're both feeling insecure. We're all feeling insecure. Okay. Fortunately, that didn't go badly. So there's that. There's efficacy or effectiveness. How good are we at the stuff we're trying to do? The things we're trying to accomplish? How effective are our skills? How efficient are our skills? And then there's what I call equality or equitability, which has to do with, do we feel equal to others? Do we operate in a manner that's equal to others? Do others regard us as equals? Do we regard ourselves as equals to others? So it's about inclusion. Do we feel included? Are we included? Do we feel like we belong? Right? So that's pretty deep, because most of us reach for a sense of belonging. So the acronym there is actually C, security, effectiveness, and equality. You see your way through life if you feel secure, if you are effective, and if you conduct yourself in a manner that is equal to others. All right, so to illustrate this, the moment we've all been waiting for. So I didn't come to Oslo straight from Los Angeles. I did come from Los Angeles, but I have been through the UK, Denmark, Iceland, back to the UK, which included Northern Ireland. I've been traveling since August 3rd. And I ended up in Oslo, having traveled from Belfast, Northern Ireland. And when I booked my trip from Belfast, I just thought I'd be traveling from Belfast. But in actuality, see, I looked at Northern Ireland on the map. I have a tactile map. I get to touch it. And if anyone's ever looked at Northern Ireland, it doesn't really look that big. It looks rather small. Nonetheless, I wasn't staying in Belfast, and I had a blind client there with whom I was working. He did not live in Belfast. He lived in a little place called Derry, which is about, 2.5 to 3 hours transit from Belfast. So to come back to Belfast, it was really quite a journey just in itself. I left at 5 o'clock in the morning. It was a cab to a bus to a plane into London Heathrow, another plane into Oslo. Different terminals, and a long, long, hairy trip. Now, taking that trip, most of the time, I would say that the support systems there, the folks who helped me find my way through the airport, the folks who helped me find a gate, the folks who helped me find where I get my boarding pass, the folks who, I did not check my bags, I carried my bags, but the folks who helped me find my way through security, et cetera, et cetera. All of that went very well. All of that from the hotel to the bus to the plane. The plane was delayed. That was concerning. Now I'm starting to feel insecure because when I arrived into London, I was too late to make my connection. So how am I going to make my connection? Even with an assistant, how am I going to make my connection? And often the assistants don't show. Well, my assistant did show. She showed, and she even knew that the plane coming to Oslo was delayed. Thank goodness. So worked my way through there, bouncing from assistant to assistant until I finally end up on a plane to Oslo. Arrive in Oslo. Now, here's where things get a little funky. This isn't to disparage Oslo Airport, because I've had very good experiences there. This was not one of them, but I have had good experiences in Oslo, so I'm not going to categorically disparage Oslo. I will tell you, however, that assistance at airports is a bit of a Russian roulette situation. It works when it works. And if it doesn't work, you must have other elements to fall back on. What are your options? We'll talk about that, because when I got off the plane, now they did help me off the plane, that was nice. Someone met me, at the jetway, that was nice, walked with me up the jetway, and then said, please wait here. How long? We don't know. There were 3 assistants and any number of special needs passengers on that plane. So we were told as people came off the plane that we would just have to wait for an indeterminate period of time. Now, I had people to meet. People were waiting for me at, where they were just past baggage claim. The people were waiting. I had been flying for 12 hours. I really wanted to get to where I was going. How was I going to do that? Was I going to just wait for who knows how long? I did this once. Because there was no particular place for me to go. It was in London Heathrow. They said, please wait here. I said, okay. And no one came, and no one came, and no one came. And the airplane staff couldn't leave. They can't leave a passenger without anyone, to chaperone or supervise or whatever they call it. They can't just leave a passenger there. So everyone was inconvenienced for about an hour before someone showed up. I did not want to be inconvenienced, and I didn't want to inconvenience the people waiting for me. And also, from a conscientious perspective, it was clear that they didn't have enough people to help the people who needed help here. And most of these people needed more help than I did, because even as a totally blind person, I am healthy, I am physically fit, I am physically capable. The only issue I'm going to have is finding my way. Finding my way. So how does a totally blind person find his way by himself, without an assistant, from hither to yon? So I waited. I heard the escalator. The escalator came and it started and stopped, started and stopped. It depended, I think, on a sensor being triggered. So the escalator started, and I knew or strongly suspected that that escalator was what I needed. And I waited for the assistance people to leave. They all went somewhere, I presume to the plane to fetch more special people. So we were left by ourselves, and I chose that moment to take off. Okay, I took off toward the escalator, and it's interesting. Now, this cane that you see me with right now is not actually the cane that I used to travel with. This is my super duper whiz bang mega cane that I tend to use for outdoor activities, things like hiking. This cane has been through the Alps. This cane has been to dozens and dozens of different countries, hundreds and hundreds of different cities, mostly outdoor environments because it's pretty nigh and indestructible and is a great pleasure to use. However, when I travel, I tend to use this little baby, which clips to my pocket if I have a guide. My hands are full with a guide, my documents. I never let anyone take my documents, and maybe some luggage. And so I can easily put the cane away, and when I need the cane, it extends. It just sort of extends. Okay? So I did the whole little Batman move there and decided that I'm taking off. And it is actually interesting because in that moment when I decided to take off, I'd pretty much been on someone's arm for 12 hours, more or less. And it's almost like going from a Bruce Wayne moment to a Batman moment, quite literally, because it's like I feel like I've put on my cloak and I hear the music playing, bum 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 bum, wah. The cane comes out and off I go. Fortunately, there's nothing between me and the escalator to trip me up or stop me or hold me up in any way. So I go up the escalator, boom, 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 and at the top of the escalator, I meet a completely and totally unoccupied corridor. There is no one there. There is no sound. There is no noise. There are no cues. There are no people. There is nothing. How can this be? It felt like, a horror movie or something. I just gone up the escalator and I'm in a deep, dark silence. So what do I do? How do I make a decision on where to go next? So I pause and I think, okay, I can't go back. I can't do that because my pride and dignity won't let me do that. So I'm just not going to go back. And because I echolocate, okay, so that's personal capacity for you. Personal capacity is I used my cane, I found the escalator, and I could tell that there was a big wall. Okay, so if I approach this wall here and I'm talking to you, you can kind of hear my voice changing as I approach the wall. You can hear my voice changing as I move away from the wall. If you close your eyes, actually, I'll make this demonstration very clear. So if you close your eyes and I make a sound and you keep your eyes closed, listen to what happens to that sound as I approach this screen. Right? So if you open your eyes, I was just and approaching the screen. Now, I wasn't actually shushing in the airport, I was clicking. And I could tell there was a wall that stretched pretty much infinitely long in one direction and infinitely long in the other direction, and there were corridors to either side. So Thomas and I, whom you'll be meeting, he's someone I've been working with. He's a blind person in Norway whom I've been training to become an instructor of and for blind people in Norway. He, thankfully, sent me a special marker. There's a program that blind people can use. It's a GPS program called Soundscape by Microsoft. And it allows us to basically set a marker anywhere at all and then use Microsoft technology to find that marker. Thomas essentially set a marker on himself. He set a marker at the place where he was waiting for me. So I'll show you what that sounds like. Open Soundscape.
Soundscape, Microsoft Soundscape. Menu, button. Add literature user.
Okay.
Choose destination. Places near markers and routes. Button.
So, markers and routes.
Entrance to train station by Lake Norway. Cafe. Automatic. Oslo Airport just past baggage claim. Start audio beacon.
All right. Oslo Airport, just past baggage claim. I'm standing in this empty corridor. I'm not sure which way to go. I hit the audio beacon.
Markers and routes.
And
36.8 kilometers.
yeah, it didn't say that at the time. 36.8 kilometers in that direction. Okay, so if I walk for 36.8 kilometers, I will end up where Thomas was waiting. At the time, it said something like, I don't know, 80 meters or something like that, right? But it showed me the direction. It showed me which way to go. I'm a little bit lucky because it could have just said straight through the wall, okay? And that would have been unhappy. That would have made me unhappy. So I didn't do that. But
App switcher. Soundscape. Close Soundscape. Closing Soundscape. App switcher. Messages.
so that's the way I went. And I took off, clicking, using my cane, following the beacon as I went. And eventually I heard people, and eventually I got to customs, and the rest is sort of history, except for the interesting moment, two interesting moments. One was someone comes running up behind me and says, "You ran off." And I said, "So did you." And he asked me if I could see anything, and I said, I almost said, "Yes, I'm fine," but I actually said, "No, nothing at all." And then he said, "Do you need help?" And I said, "That would be nice." And he said, "I can't help you. I have other passengers I have to get back to." And I thought, well, then why did you just run halfway across the airport to catch me? So I just sent him on his way. And yeah, I just went the rest of the way, following the beacon, following other passengers, listening carefully to where they were going until I got to baggage claim. Now, this was interesting. So I'm in baggage claim. You've all been through baggage claim. It's a big, hairy mess. And where do you go and how do you get there? And the signage isn't clear, especially if you're from the UK. And I guess the signage is mostly in Norwegian because we are in Norway. And a lot of people were having trouble finding their way out of the baggage claim, except for me, who was just following the beacon. I had a trail of people following me outside of baggage claim because I was following a beacon. So we had a situation that is very normal, a situation where I have to find my way somewhere, or I have to find something in order to do something. And all of these issues, or all of these elements come into play. What are my personal capacities to do that? What technologies might be available to do that? What support systems are or aren't available to do that? Actually, there were support systems because once I finally reached customs, there were a lot of passengers basically going in a similar direction to where I was going. So sometimes they would say, you know, we're going left here, we're going right up here, or whatever, and it was just easy to follow the river of people who were more or less going to the same place I was going. It just wasn't rocket science. And then as far as adaptations, we've talked about those. Oslo Airport has, before you get to escalators or travelators, it has tactile warning strips that let you know that you're approaching stairs or steps or what have you. In certain parts of the airport, they have lines on the floor and whatnot. So that's basically an illustration, not just of what I go through in my own life, but what we all go through in our lives in one way or another, in one situation or another, because all of us encounter situations where we have to find something. We have to find our way somewhere. There's an unknown that lies before us, and we somehow have to find our way through it. And it's drawing upon these elements, our adaptations, our personal capacities, our technologies, our support systems that get us through in a manner where we feel secure and effective and equal to others. So in that regard, that's really a big part of what I teach and what I teach people to teach. You saw some of that going on in the video earlier. I'd like to show you an additional demonstration that's really more focused on some of the teaching process that we use to help blind people, in this case a very young blind person, to develop these very elements, these very abilities.
Snu hodet fra høyre til venstre mens du klikker, og si om brettet er høyre eller venstre eller foran. Mens du klikker.
Høyre.
Ta på nå. Riktig. En gang til. Stopp.
Høyre.
Ta på nå. En gang til. 1, 2, 3.
Foran.
Ta på det. Ok, en siste gang. Klar? 1, 2, 3.
Foran. Nei, venstre.
Look at that. Well done. Well done. Well done. He was 2.5 at that last bit there that you saw with me working with him. He's literally learning to see. He is a totally blind young boy, literally learning to see. And by that, I'm not making it up, I'm not being hyperbolic. It really is true in the sense that the research these days, there's a lot of it coming out of Durham University in the UK, and they've just picked us apart. They've done MRI studies and behavioral studies and psychophysical studies. They did eventually, with lots and lots and lots of scanning, they did find my brain. It is actually in there. And not only did they find my brain, but they discovered that my brain and the brain of a bunch of other people who are blind, those who echolocate proficiently, and who are able to get around making their own decisions, are actually using the visual cortex. They're using the visual parts of their brain. So when a proficient echolocator echolocates, like you saw Luca doing in the video, and you become proficient, that part of your brain that sees actually becomes active to see. It becomes active to extract images from the signal or from the echoes coming back to you as a result of you sending out signals. And the visual cortex, it doesn't mind not seeing, really. In fact, some professionals, some neurologists no longer refer to it as the visual cortex. They refer to it as the spatial cortex. Because what it really wants to do is it wants to take sensory data and organize it into spatial images. It can be Braille. So proficient Braille readers also trigger the visual cortex. It could be people who are very, very good at language. Blind people will often engage descriptive language to find out what's going on or what's around them. And if they are good at receiving and processing that descriptive language, then again, you see this functioning happening in the visual cortex. So the brain is actually adapting to finding new ways to see, even if you're blind, right? So in essence, you're adapting to blindness. I used that languaging earlier, I used that terminology earlier, you're adapting to blindness. Well, any of us can adapt to any condition that we find challenging, to conditions that we find fearful, because of the unknowns, maybe, because of the darkness inherent in those conditions. So that is basically a huge part of what I do. I mentioned earlier that with all the finding issues, I guess, that you might say that blind people have, finding solutions to problems isn't really one of them. It's something that we do very well. Finding our way through life and livelihood toward accomplishments, toward achievements, is something that we do relatively well. And I think one of the main reasons we're able to do it relatively well is because those of us who've adapted to blindness have neutralized fear of the unknown, fear of the dark. When we adapt to blindness, we neutralize man's greatest fear, and at the root, which lies at the root of pretty much all fear, I believe. So to wrap that up, I'd like to play one more video, and it's just an example of how a few more people found ways to do more things. Do it if you want to.
That's our hope for Hamoudi, is that he's going to, as an adult, he's just going to be able to just power through life like he does now, but basically without anybody helping him.
People get stereotypes from what they think. So what I do is I show people that they're wrong. And I do my normal stuff. And that has blown to pieces a bunch of stereotypes. I go out there and I run through them. So go with your heart, get out there, do something, Don't just sit there thinking you can't do anything, because you can.
You guys can see with your eyes, and we can see with our ears.
3, 2, 1, go! This obstacle course is not just holes, it is a goal. And the bigger the goal, the more obstacles you'll face. And on the other side of that goal is victory.
Un Guinness World Record.
Stop.
E allora! È stato bellissimo vederlo qua.
¡Sí se puede!
Sí se puede, sí se puede. Yes, you can.
So we got a little bit of a late start, so I thought that we might run a little bit over if people can, because I'd be happy to take a few questions, if anyone has questions. What would you like to ask the blind guy? Now's your chance. If you raise your hand, you'll have to raise it loudly, or you can just speak up. No? Norwegians are tough. But that's okay. That's okay. That means that my presentation was so amazingly clear that there are indeed no questions. Oh, there we go, see? Okay, how about you first? Someone over here?
I'm just a bit curious about the equipment you have on your stomach. What are
Oh, this, yes, of course you would be. This is, it's a Braille device. So I'm actually reading notes that I've just, to help me organize. And this is a little display that changes as I move through line by line. And Braille, you all know Braille was invented by a blind person, Louis Braille. It was a solution to a very, very difficult problem. How does a blind person read? How can a blind person be educated? And we use Braille to this day. He didn't invent this particular device, though. And then there's a question on this side of the room. Yep.
I just wondered, what sort of art do you like?
What sort of art do I like? Yeah. Art. So music, of course. I'm very much into music. I am a trained vocalist myself, classically trained. And I've done some composition, although nothing professionally. I certainly love music. I love early music, medieval music, and Renaissance music. I also like tactile art. So there are examples of art that have been made tactile that you can touch, and of course sculptures that you can touch. And I find, well, not all art is wonderful, but I mean, all art is art, and much of it is very interesting, especially when you are understanding the work of art through the sense of touch. So when you're looking at art through a sense of touch, you're building the picture as you feel, each piece at a time. Your brain just kind of stitches all that together, whereas visually you kind of look at it and your brain kind of takes in the whole thing. Understanding art tactily is, I think, a different approach that can yield very profound results. So anyone else?
I have a question. You said something about the 13-year-old that was treated differently before and after. How was it treated differently, and what would you like? How would you like to be treated?
I think generally what people do find when they go blind is that first of all, people tend to assume that you can't do things, right? So you're now kind of helpless in the sense that you're not able to do a bunch of stuff. And we often equate that to being a child, right? So you look after a blind person, you care for a blind person in the same way that you look after a child or you care for a child. So we are often talked down to. People use their simple words, they use a funny voice or whatever. That's actually quite real, and it happens more often than you'd think. But that's not even the biggest issue. I think the biggest issue are presumptions that people make, suppositions that people make. People just assume things about blind people based, I think, on what their responses or what they think their responses to going blind would be. And a sighted person going blind or putting on a blindfold or trying to operate in the dark is nothing at all like a blind person adapting to blindness. So I think that it would be very helpful if people would catch themselves from making assumptions, and rather than pouring energy into making assumptions and mostly being wrong, it's just easier to observe, and then, or to just ask. I'll give one example. I was in Germany, and I was at a conference, and they made an assumption. They basically stuck me in the disability room, right? The room for special people. It was a special room, and they just thought, well, he's blind, so he'll want this room. If they had asked, I would have said no, and there are lots of reasons I would say no. For one thing, there's absolutely nothing in the rooms reserved for people with disabilities, and I'm glad they do reserve those rooms, but there's absolutely nothing in those rooms that is helpful to a blind person, right? There's just nothing there. There's nothing in Braille. You know, you go to make your coffee, you still have to figure out which one is the coffee and what kind of coffee is it, and how to use the coffee maker and all that sort of stuff, right? So there's nothing in those rooms helpful to a blind person specifically. In this particular case, it eliminates the need for stairs to get to the conference venue, which was nice, I suppose. Certainly if you were in a wheelchair, it was nice, except that it was miles of labyrinth. It was in a basement, and it was miles of labyrinthian halls and tunnels to get to this conference. Or you could go outside where it was snowing and raining and go from one door to the next. And as a blind person, both of those options were a bit rough, right? They were just a bit rough. So I actually went to them and I said, this room is difficult for a number of reasons. And they said, well, the only room we had available was on the 3rd floor, and it has stairs. And I have no difficulty with stairs, right? None at all. So there was an assumption made that I would have difficulty with stairs. There was no need to make that assumption. All they had to do was ask. I think there's one more question. We can take one more question. Nope. Well, then on to the best part of the evening. So you saw in the first video and the second video, you saw Thomas. He was working with Luca. He was in the video, and he has a wonderful voice and a wonderful singing voice. He also has a wonderful way with children and a wonderful way of teaching people. And I met Thomas my first trip to Norway in 2014. We were both very impressed with each other, and as of 2017, roughly, 2018, Visioneers Norway was formed, and the purpose, or one of the main purposes of Visioneers Norway, was to bring echolocation and what I call self-determination training, freedom training, to Norway in the form of blind instructors who were blind themselves, who could actually impart this ability and share this ability and share these concepts and ideas, however you want to conceptualize them, with other blind people, particularly blind children, but really with everyone. And as of this trip, Thomas has officially completed his training and is about to become an official certified socio-perceptual navigation instructor. Thomas, if you would come up and we can make this official. So, it is an immense honor to work with you and to have worked with you for years and years. We've made this happen. Come hell, high water, pandemic, everything else. We have
escalators.
Escalators, yes, well, the escalators, all of those things and all the above. I present to you a certificate of completion. You are now officially a socio-navigation instructor with Braille on the back for you to actually, it's not the easiest thing.
You know, that's quite
a lot of Braille, yes.
Even here in Norway, when we think we're quite good at doing these things, I think this is the first diploma I've ever received in Braille, so that's something to think about.
That's Visioneers Norway. So once again, thank you all. This is a hugely auspicious occasion for me. Again, the results of many years' work. Thomas has worked very hard to do this. And thanks so much for, is there anything you'd like to say?
Probably a lot, but no, I won't keep you. No, it's just been. Some of you know me, and most of you don't. But yeah, I'm just very mostly surprised actually to be standing here, because this was not what I expected. I remember when we first met, I was at the back in the room when you did your presentation, and all the sighted people were there, and it was just me and 2 other blind folks at the back. And then when you were done, I just ran up to you and said, "Hey, can you teach me to see with my ears?" And suddenly here I am. This was not part of the plan. I just wanted to learn for myself. But
well, thanks for sharing what you are, who you are, and what you know. And thank you all for sharing in this moment. Okay, good.